niches in our programming schedule. That's a niche. That's a place
that is.
We harbor and gather, sit down and say, here he is.
And may
Here's our man.
Right, and may we for a long time, too. Thank you, Mr. King.
Go get him, Aaron.
I shall. Thank you. Good evening again, everyone. This being Valentine's Day, the program is rich with stories of love, but not all the sort of love stories you expect on Valentine's Day, certainly not where we begin tonight. There are no Hallmark cards that celebrate love of country, duty, and honor. No one sends roses or buys chocolates for those whose idealism extends beyond the concept of self-sacrifice. You're about to meet a man who is the first to do something. Captain David Rozell was not the first amputee in Iraq, but he is the first amputee to return to duty there. His story, told in his memoir, Back in Action, is a story of strength, a story of courage, and yes, a story of love. In the days after the fall of Baghdad, before the car bombings and the IED attacks that seem so commonplace now, David Rozell's Humvee hit a landmine, and David Rozell nearly lost his life.
I remember the looks on the faces of my soldiers as they had to carry me and my litter out onto the landing zone to load me in the helicopter and saying goodbye to my brothers. I mean, just gut-wrenching, really gut-wrenching.
He would survive, but lose his right foot.
I laid back and really thought about it, and it broke my heart. You know, I don't like being still. I like being in motion. And to say that you're going to take away one of my feet, it hit me. I couldn't even imagine it. But I knew it was the only chance.
That really is the beginning of Captain Rozell's story. An amputee with the heart of a soldier, foot gone, heart intact.
My most response was, I've given enough. But my true self, my most inner person, you know, is not a quitter. I realized I at least need to see if I can do this. I at least need to prove to myself that I can stay on active duty. I can go back and fight if I have to.
As amputees go, he was lucky. Others struggled to learn to eat again or take a step again. Rozell's challenge was to become a soldier again, a step at a time. First walking, then running, then competing.
When I started doing those races, I was horribly self-conscious of the way I looked. And I didn't feel like an athlete. And I didn't take myself very seriously. I felt like an amputee. I felt like I was disabled.
There were triathlons and Ironman relays. There was the New York City Marathon. And each one brought Rozell closer to who he was and who he wanted to be.
And then just the nature of competition. As I did more and more events, I won one. And as they handed me the trophy, I felt like a stud.
In just 10 months after he lost that foot, David Rozell won his race. Not a marathon, something more.
I'd won. They found me fit for duty. I'd proven to a board of doctors and the Army, the Department of Defense, that I was fit for duty. Okay, now what? That was my goal, was to be found fit for duty. It wasn't to go back to Iraq. It's never been my goal to go back to Iraq. It's been to be able to have the ability to take command again. That's all I wanted. All right? So now I had to make the decision.
I, as a commander, hold a training meeting.
And in the end, with the country at war, the man with the soldier's heart made the only decision he could.
When I think about going back, yeah, it's going to be hard, but it's my duty. And if you don't really know what that word means, then you don't understand it. But I believe in it, because it's who I am. I am a cavalry officer. I've commanded troops before, and I'm going back I had the opportunity to command troops again under the same conditions, plus I was the first amputee to do it. I love it. I'm proud to serve the American people.
I gotcha.
We all, I suppose, judge ourselves by different standards. But for most, at some point, we ask, how will those who we love most and love us most see us? David Rozell, now just weeks away from heading back to war, believes he knows.
The truth is that a man judges himself on how his son perceives him. And although my son only has a perception of how good warm cookies are right now, in 30 years he's going to look at me as an old man, and he's going to sit down and think about it, and I want him to be proud of me. And I think that my son will be proud of what I've done. And that's the most important thing to me.
Later in the program, we'll examine another kind of love that Hallmark hasn't quite gotten around to making a card for either. The infatuation with the moment when you know something you didn't know the moment before. In short, the love of invention. More important, how not to stifle it in young women, because men and women, young and old, are different. So 2 reports, what it means, but first, what it is. Here's CNN's Elizabeth Cohen.
They notice it when they make dinner. They notice it when they walk the dog.
There are about 100 identified structural differences between the male and the female brain.
Michael Gurian, psychologist and author of What Could He Be Thinking, and his wife, family therapist Gail Reed Gurian, say they notice all the time how differently their brains function, how he tends, when they're talking, to get right to the point.
Right. You're taking in all sorts of stuff, whereas all I'm doing is I'm listening for what I think is the key variable, and I hone right in on that. And that's really very male-female.
When scientists look inside men's and women's brains, literally with MRIs, they find a biological reason for this difference. Women, in general, have a larger corpus callosum. That's the area of the brain that handles communication between the 2 hemispheres. So the 2 sides talk better to each other. That's one theory as to why studies show women tend to multitask better.
The more female brain approach, gather a lot of material, gather a lot of information, feel a lot, hear a lot, sense a lot.
MRIs show men, on the other hand, tend to move information more easily within each hemisphere.
Men, because we tend to compartmentalize our communication into a smaller part of the brain, we tend to be better at getting right to the issue.
Scientists say many male-female brain differences are apparent even at a very young age. Males have more activity in mechanical centers of the brain, and females in verbal and emotional centers. So give a girl a doll, she'll try to talk to it.
That doll becomes lifelike to that girl, but you give it to the 2-year-old boy, you're more likely, not all the time, but you're more likely than not to see that boy try to take the head off the doll, or he thinks spatial mechanical, so he's using the doll as an object.
And what accounts for these differences? Much of the answer lies in our genes. Women are born with 2 X chromosomes, and men with an X and a Y.
And on that Y chromosome are at least 21 unique genes, unique to males, which control many of the body's operations down to the level of the cell.
Dr. Marianne Legato says because of these genetic differences, men and women experience different symptoms when they're having a heart attack. And genes, not body size, are the reason men can drink more alcohol than women without becoming intoxicated.
Women do not have the enzyme in their stomach that degrades alcohol, which men have.
Of course, there are many similarities between men and women mentally and physically, but scientists are learning all the time about the differences and what they mean. Elizabeth Cohen, CNN, Atlanta.
Now here's where this all gets tricky, and not just where it comes to male and female comparisons. This is traditionally where science meets pseudoscience, and in many cases superstition and bigotry. So what do you do? Or even more simply, what do you say? Some thoughts from CNN's Jeff Greenfield.
If you don't notice that the great majority of NBA players are black, you almost surely have a vision problem. More than 75% of the players are African American. You might also notice that in general, black ball players play a different style of game than their white counterparts. The dribbles, the drives, the slam dunks just don't seem the same. But does this tell us anything about genetic, hardwired distinctions? That's at best an Olympic-sized leap. The champion. And speaking of the Olympics, ever since 1968, the marathon run at the Olympics and just about everywhere else has been dominated by the Kenyans, specifically Kenyans who come from the Kalenjin tribe. Altitude, diet, tradition, socioeconomic factors explain much, but an article in a scientific journal last fall says that such success also points to a possible genetic component. Now, does that make you a bit uncomfortable? Or what about the fact that, as biologist David Page has written, The genetic difference between males and females absolutely dwarfs all other differences in the human genome, and that one of the most obvious differences is that the average man is substantially stronger than the average woman. We're uneasy about such assertions because we know our past, when so-called experts blithely asserted complete falsehoods about racial, gender, and ethnic differences designed to perpetuate, even encourage, blatant discrimination. Jews were not as smart as Gentiles. Blacks were genetically linked to primates. Women were incapable of rational thought. They were also said, by the way, to be incapable of sexual enjoyment. So no wonder Harvard President Larry Summers got into hot water for suggesting that innate differences might explain the paucity of women among professional scientists or engineers. The problem lies in the fear that acknowledging these differences could lead to certain social policies. For instance, if most women are weaker than most men, it tells you absolutely nothing about allowing women to be firefighters. But it may mean there'll be a lot fewer women in the ranks. In New York City, where women have been taking the same test as men for more than a decade, there are 28 females in a force of more than 11,000. By contrast, the U.S. Army holds men and women to distinctly different standards. A 21-year-old man must do at least 40 push-ups. For women, it's 19. Gender norming, critics call this. No women in combat units, the brass reminds them, so maybe the tests don't have to be exactly the same. Now, this discussion gets even more intense in matters of race. Why do black students tend to underperform in academic settings, even when those students come from affluent, stable families? Peer pressure not to achieve, the legacy of discrimination, low expectations from their teachers that could undermine their own self-confidence? And if we acknowledge this, does that somehow imply that everything from affirmative action to outreach programs are doomed to failure? We live in a time when we're fully prepared to acknowledge, even laugh about, differences in how we walk and talk and mate and pray and raise our kids. But the whole conversation is so loaded with our knowledge of past ugliness. It's no wonder we approach the topic as though we were walking through a minefield. Jeff Greenfield, CNN, New York.
Now, we're not done with this quite yet. More to come in the hour ahead, starting with the best and the brightest and what it takes to make them shine.
I developed an inexpensive technique using digital photography to replace a $30,000 piece of equipment for chemical analysis.
Amber Hess, high school inventor, and the most important invention of all for nurturing more Amber Hesses.
We try to set an atmosphere that girls, boys, whoever they are, that they think that they can be successful.
A young woman any father might be proud of. So why isn't hers?
I love my parents very much, and they love me, and they disagree with what I'm doing at the moment.
She's an A student with a drive for public service. He's a very public conservative. This isn't about love so much as who she loves.
Let me kiss your beautiful wife.
Later, she says more than 400,000 served. So how does she keep McMarriage tasting homemade? Also, 1 part Thomas Paine, 1 part real pain. The growing power of bloggers. And feast your eyes.
I think it's really, really nice. Something different.
Who knew Central Park blossomed in February? Just make a right at Strawberry Fields and you'll find us for This Is Newsnight.
Pacific Life is proud to bring you Newsnight with Aaron Brown. For insurance, annuities, and investments, choose Pacific Life, the power to help you succeed.
Amber Hess has one of those names that sounds like could have been a pen name, sort of pen name that a smart person uses when he or she wants to write a romance novel on the side. But a fiction writer would never make up a life like Amber's, because her achievements in science seem so far beyond those of us mere mortals. And they turn any conventional notion about gender and science right on its head. For 2 years, Amber Hess has been on a mission to figure out a cheaper and easier way to analyze lots of stuff.
I developed an inexpensive technique using digital photography to replace a $30,000 piece of equipment for chemical analysis. Chromatography in general is used by tons of people, and people using, analyzing just tons of different compounds, whether it be plants. You can use it like looking at different medicines.
This may not mean much to most of us, but it has landed Amber a coveted spot as a finalist in the Intel Science Talent Search, the Nobel Prize of high school science. In March, she'll compete against 39 other finalists for a $100,000 college scholarship.
I wrote a computer program using MATLAB, and it does it all automatically in just a few seconds.
That's welcome news for scientists everywhere. Now, with just a digital camera and a simple computer program, they'll be able to analyze compounds quickly and inexpensively.
Amber's a very gifted student and very conscientious. And because of her passions for science, she was a great student, working very hard and very diligently, always wanting to have the questions answered.
A.J. Galindo has been teaching chemistry at Stevenson School for 17 years. He's worked with Amber on her project. And science, he says, does not discriminate when it comes to gender.
The boys and the girls have the same aptitudes and abilities. Some years in the honors chem class, there are a couple outstanding boys. Some years it's outstanding girls. Other years it's, tied between the sexes.
So if boys and girls enter the classroom on an even playing field when it comes to science, what needs to happen inside that classroom to keep things that way?
We try to set an atmosphere that girls, boys, whoever they are, that they think that they can be successful.
It's dissolving, like at first.
And I think that's how those girls think. I'm just another one in the classroom, and I want to raise my hand because I've got something to say.
Actually, most of the time I end up doing better than the guys, so I definitely believe that women and men are equal in science.
Smart young women who follow their own paths sometimes find themselves at odds with expectations, including those of their own parents. The public knows Alan Keyes as a conservative talk show host, a political candidate, commentator. Fair to say his views on gay marriage are strong. He has called homosexuality selfish hedonism. Mr. Keyes is also a father, and today his public and private worlds collided when his daughter Maya made her first public appearance as a gay activist. At a rally in Maryland, the 19-year-old Ms. Keyes spoke frankly to CNN about her parents' reaction to her sexuality and her reaction to them.
They're very conservative. They weren't very happy about the whole thing, but they said that they talked to me about it a lot, and at first they said it was a phase. They were in denial. They didn't think I really was actually queer, but when they came to kind of accept that I was, they just were not too pleased. I love my parents very much, and they love me, and they disagree with what I'm doing at the moment, and as such, they can't support me in this activity, but they're still always going to love me. I know that.
No public response so far from Mr. Keyes and what his daughter had to say today. Communication between fathers and daughters can be full of complications. It's often argued the same holds true for men and women in general. And that's where we turn to now on this Valentine's Day. Joining us from Washington is Deborah Tannen, professor of linguistics at Georgetown University, the author of 15 books, including You Just Don't Understand, Men and Women in Conversation. Professor, good to have you with us.
Hi.
People, I think, it might be helpful if, as we go along, they just think of their own relationships and how some of this applies. But part of what you have written about is that women like to talk it out, and men are really actually quite comfortable just hanging out together.
It's building on what we just saw with the little kids. We just saw that if you give a girl a doll, she'll talk to it. And give a boy an action figure, he'll probably try to take its head off, figure out how it works. For women, talk is the glue that holds a relationship together. So when she asks her husband or her boyfriend, how was your day? And he says, okay.
Yeah.
She feels something's missing in the relationship. He doesn't. He feels he tells her everything, but he means everything that seems to him worth telling. She may start talking about a problem, and he may think, gee, why is she telling me this? She probably wants a solution. He offers it. She's frustrated.
This is the part that's really interesting to me, is that because I suppose I know I do this, when I hear this, I think what I'm being asked here is, how do I solve it? And that's not necessarily, I know from firsthand experience, what's going on at all.
And that's why it's so frustrating sometimes, because you really are trying to give her what you think she wants. And I think it comes down to what you would do if you were in that situation. You wouldn't tell about a problem unless you wanted somebody to give you the solution. It's almost like this men asking directions conundrum. As many men feel that they don't want to do something that's going to put them in a one-down position, so telling about a problem would do that.
Would put them in a what?
Just like asking directions would do that.
I'm sorry, would put them in a one-down position?
Yeah, you know, when you look at how boys play, they're using language to make sure that they don't get pushed around by the other boys. You look how girls use talk in their play, they're telling secrets. So your best friend is the one you tell everything to. So she and her grown-up relationship thinks she's got a new and improved version of a best friend. We'll tell each other everything. But he's kind of working on a different plane. So at the end of the day, when he comes home, if something happened during the day, you know, that kind of made him feel kind of bad, the last thing he wants to do is relive it at home. That's going to make him feel less good about himself. Sometimes if he just knows why she would want to do that, it's a lot easier to go ahead and just listen.
Okay, let's see if we can solve this now.
I think we can.
Wait a second, we're not supposed to solve it. Is this a is this a genetic difference? Is this something we're hardwired to be? Is this a cultural or environmental difference, the way we're raised, or is it some weird combination of both? Does it exist in all cultures, for example?
I think it is a combination of both. I was amazed when You Just Don't Understand came out that I got letters from all over the world, as far as Indonesia, Japan, telling me that they had the same problems, they fit in the same pattern. But then there are other things really can be changed by culture. For example, we know that boys tend to be more aggressive, tend to fight more, but there are cultures where boys are just very discouraged from fighting, and then other cultures where it would be encouraged. So I think culture and genes really play, and they're both in the mix there. And I think that also can play a role. You know, if you go out with your wife or your girlfriend, she says something, you might kind of disagree with her in public. You know, that's just an intellectual game. She may take it as, you're disloyal to me. Women often take personally or literally when men kind of use argument just as a way of having a conversation, maybe even teasing to show you're friendly. I noticed in my work in the workplace, if women talked about another woman's clothing, it was a compliment. If men commented on clothing, it was usually a playful insult. You know, where'd you get that tie? Looks like your breakfast is still on it. So it's using fight as a way to show affection. Women don't do that as often, so they sometimes feel hurt by it.
Professor, good to have you with us. This is interesting stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more note on all of this to consider. 21 years ago, a woman named Geraldine Ferraro secured a place in American history and broke down yet another barrier for American women. Her story tonight as we continue our year-long anniversary series, Then and Now.
Political history was made when 1984 Democratic presidential candidate Walter Mondale named New York Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate. It was the first time a woman was a contender for the country's second highest office on a major party ticket.
Whether it was a rally, whether it was a press conference, whether it was a debate against the Vice President of the United States, my biggest concern when I walked in was making sure that I did it right and didn't let down the women.
The re-election of Ronald Reagan ended her executive office hopes, but Ferraro went on to serve as a U.S. ambassador, and after leaving government, host of CNN's Crossfire. In 1998, while campaigning for a Senate seat, Ferraro was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a very rare and often fatal blood cancer. She is now in what her doctors call pathological remission. Besides raising awareness for myeloma, she's traded the life of a politician for a slightly less demanding VP role with a global consulting group. Ferraro has been married for 45 years, the mother of 3, and the grandmother of 7. She considers herself a very lucky person.
I went from being a kid who lost her father and who lived in the South Bronx almost to going in to live in the White House. That just tells you about what this country is all about.
Then and Now is sponsored by Johnson & Johnson. At Johnson & Johnson, we believe nursing is the essence of caring. Log on to CNN.com/CNN25 to read more on where these newsmakers are now.
Here's a Valentine's Day riddle for you now. What do Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward have in common with Britney Spears and Jason Allen Alexander? Both couples tied the knot in Las Vegas, except that one marriage lasted about 55 hours and the other 47 years so far. With roughly 200 instant wedding chapels, Las Vegas reminds us that love is the ultimate crapshoot, and that makes Charlotte Richards perhaps the ultimate croupier. Her story now from CNN's Frank Buckley.
Another wedding is underway at the Little White Wedding Chapel in Las Vegas. The groom is nervous, and here comes the bride.
Who gifts this woman to be married to this man?
I do, ma'am. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll.
Within minutes, the rings are on, the groom is shedding a tear, and Elvis is serenading the happy couple.
I'll be sad and blue. I love you.
Presiding over this wedding,
Love is so important, isn't it?
and thousands of others in the course of nearly 50 years in the wedding business, Charlotte Richards.
Let me kiss your beautiful wife.
She's a sentimental, romantic, and a quickie wedding icon. At the Little White Wedding Chapel in Las Vegas, Charlotte offers everything from flowers to photos.
Cheese, come on. Cheese.
It's one-stop shopping at the place that pioneered the drive-through wedding, where you can get married in a tunnel of love.
And here I am, the wedding queen of the West.
The wedding queen herself didn't get married here. Richards was married in Reno. But that man she married 45 years ago set her on the path to all of this. And the story of how it all started is really a love story. It begins in Las Vegas in the 1950s. Richards says her first husband had abandoned her and their 3 little boys. Just when she was down to her last dollars, this man stepped into her life.
He was my knight in shining armor.
Merle Richards was a wedding photographer. He offered her a job, was kind to her kids, and got her a place to stay. In 3 years, they were married.
He rescued me. He absolutely rescued me. And I think of what would have happened if it wasn't for him. I really don't know.
Because of him, there was a new life, working on weddings, including those of Las Vegas royalty, like Elvis and Priscilla, Frank and Mia. And in the 1970s, they bought the Little White Wedding Chapel. Love was in the air every day at work and at home.
He had me on a pedestal. He was so good to me. I never loved anyone more in my whole life than I did my Merle.
But in 1982, her partner in business and life, Merle Richards, he died.
And seeing him die was just, it took a lot of my breath away.
Richards says she tried to move on. She dated, but no one was Merle. So Richards never remarried, even as she continues to officiate over the marriages of so many other couples.
I think that's the answer. I think just being a part of their romantic moment keeps me in love with Merle. And when I give, I'm giving a part of my love and his love to these people.
Till death do us part, a wedding vow Richards refused to obey.
And someday I'll look forward to seeing him again.
Frank Buckley, CNN, Las Vegas.
Now, we're not trying to ruin anyone's Valentine's Day here, but there is a very real, a very sobering statistic about marriage in the country. About 1 in 2 ends in divorce. Some couples, when they run into trouble, do seek professional help, marriage counseling. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. One couple's story tonight from CNN's Bob Franken.
Stranger come here often?
Really?
In this family, Michael Feldy is the quiet one.
She thought I was completely competent, was fearless on everything, not knowing that my stomach was turning a lot of cases.
Dee appears to be the extrovert, bubbly, outgoing, confident.
he's going to think I'm a failure, and I'll never be able to look at my husband again. And
After 10 years of miscommunication, a series of health and family crises almost blew them apart. Dee wanted to go home to Mother.
And she said, no. She said, you got married, you have your children, you need to work with your husband rather than with me and work out your problems.
Devout Catholics, the Feldies turned to faith-based counseling.
There's a three-way partnership, God and your spouse and yourself.
Knowing that the church said that you shouldn't divorce and that you can't divorce, making us work on our relationship, it was just wonderful.
Whether faith-based or secular, counseling aims to give couples a new way to see their relationship.
That it will give any given couple the opportunity to determine one way or the other whether it does make sense for them to stay together or whether, tragically, it makes sense for them to separate and divorce.
They taught us to listen to each other. They taught us to understand where the other person was coming from.
How to listen in a very deep, empathic way and be able to connect with the partner's point of view, the partner's feelings, concerns, and desires.
Cupid's arrow often gets so worn down by everyday stress after a while that it breaks. The divorce rate these days hovers around 50%.
When I am successful in helping a couple get to a point of healing sometimes some very profound wounds in their relationship, it's an extremely heartwarming experience.
The Feldies are now faith-based mentors who teach others in marital trouble that their marriage, now 21 years strong, is proof that love can overcome. Bob Franken, CNN, Washington.
Still to come tonight, they're the new media, but are they up to the same old game of gotcha? Bloggers and the stir they are causing. We'll take a break. First, around the world on a Valentine's Day. This is Newsnight.
Tonight's Market Roundup is brought to you by Bank of America. Higher standards.
Quick look at some of the other stories that made news around the world today. Security alert in Lebanon after the assassination of former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. Powerful blast ripped apart his motorcade in Beirut. 10 people died in all. Mr. Hariri helped rebuild Lebanon after the civil war. He was quite an extraordinary man, but he clashed with Syria, a key power broker in Lebanese politics, with troops on the ground there. Syria denying any involvement. A group never heard from says it carried out the attack. That claim not verified. This assassination has the possibility of roiling the waters of the Middle East. Here at home, the CIA delivers a major classified report to the White House on Wednesday. The agency is under orders from the president to come up with a plan to dramatically increase the number of officers who battle terrorism and weapons proliferation. And a follow-up to a story we told you out of Sri Lanka last week. DNA tests have confirmed this little boy's name is Abilas. The tsunami quite literally ripped him out of the arms of his mother. After he was found alive, 8 women claimed to be his mom. His parents couldn't prove Abilas was theirs because the tsunami washed away the documentation of his birth. They will now be reunited. Now here's a safe bet. You know you're in hot water when somebody invents a new word or phrase to describe your pain. For Dan Rather, Jeff Gannon, former CNN executive Easton Jordan, and others, the phrase blog swarm qualifies. Hugh Hewitt came up with it. He's a media critic and naturally a blogger. Steve Lovelady takes exception to it, the phenomenon, not the phrase. He too is a media critic and a blogger. Beginning to see the pattern here? Here's CNN's Howard Kurtz.
They're called bloggers, the people who spew their opinions from bedrooms and basements, often hitting their favorite target, the mainstream media. And they're having a growing impact. Take the case of Jeff Gannon, the White House correspondent for two conservative websites, Talon News and GOP USA. After Gannon asked President Bush a loaded question, liberal bloggers, led by Daily Kos and Atrios, discovered that his real name is James Guckert, that he had registered some web addresses with embarrassing names, and even circulated a provocative photo of him. Gannon quit last week. Bloggers helped prompt another resignation last week, that of Eason Jordan, CNN's chief news executive. Jordan had stirred a furor at an off-the-record conference in Davos, Switzerland, by saying that U.S. soldiers were targeting journalists in Iraq. He backed off that statement when challenged, to what degree is in dispute, and later said he never meant to suggest and doesn't believe that soldiers were intentionally killing people they knew to be journalists. The bloggers, led by such conservatives as radio host Hugh Hewitt and National Review Online, began pounding Jordan. But the mainstream press, with the exception of a few newspaper articles and talk shows, ignored the story, and yet it didn't matter. The businessman who posted the first account of what he heard Jordan say at Davos had started a brushfire.
Anyone who's a witness to news can be a reporter, because anyone and everyone has access to the press, to the internet. Everyone is a wolf blitzer in sheep's clothing.
Jordan was already controversial for writing in the New York Times 2 years ago that CNN had not reported some of Saddam Hussein's abuses to protect its Iraqi employees.
Why does CNN, or CBS, which came under cyberspace fire for Dan Rather's discredited story on President Bush, care what bloggers say? These online commentators can generate enough noise that they push a story into the press, or circumvent the mainstream media entirely by communicating directly with computer users. The people who own the printing presses and television towers are no longer the gatekeepers of what is news.
But for all its fact-checking prowess, the Internet can also be a place of ugly rumors, such as the unsubstantiated allegations on the conservative site FreeRepublic.com that Baltimore's Democratic Mayor Martin O'Malley was having an extramarital affair.
These are despicable lies. These are falsehoods.
Falsehoods that, it turned out, were spread by a longtime aide to Maryland's Republican governor, Robert Ehrlich. When the Washington Post revealed the postings, Ehrlich fired the aide. Sometimes, the much-maligned media can also act as a check on the blogosphere. Howard Kurtz, CNN, Washington.
Ahead on the program, it may not be spring yet, but Central Park is most definitely in bloom. An open-air, saffron-colored art exhibit stretching along 23 miles of pathways will take you through the park as it looks now. And the rooster strolls through our studio with morning papers. Strolls? I think not. We'll take a break first. This is Newsnight.
Newsnight with Aaron Brown is brought to you by Tyco, a vital part of your world.
Something unexpected happened in New York City over the weekend. The city seemed to fall in love. And what could be more preposterous than losing your heart to 5,200 tons of steel, 165,000 bolts and self-locking nuts, and over 116,000 miles of nylon thread woven into bolts of saffron cloth? If The Gates by Christo and his wife Jan Claude had opened as a movie this weekend instead of a sculpture in Central Park, it would already be described as a runaway hit at the box office. But on this day that we celebrate love, we're sure that many of the 700,000 people who saw it this weekend will think of it more as an affair to remember long beyond the 16 days it has to work its magic in Central Park.
When the fabric panels will come down out of their cocoon, we will feel exactly like when a woman is told by the doctor it's a girl, and we will feel it's the gate.
The engineering challenges would have been trying to create something that's simple, to devise the weight and the leveling plate and the quarter sleeves and all those things that put it together.
And are we ready?
Rectangular geometric shape of the gates reflect grid pattern of 100 city blocks surrounding Central Park. We are borrowing that public space and we create gentle disturbances for a few days. We really try to energize the most banal space between your feet and first branches of the tree. Now the fabric panel move in all the directions, very whimsically, very sensually, reflect the serpentine character of the walkway system and of course the bare branches of the tree.
Each one of our projects is like a child of ours. If other people enjoy it, it's a bonus. But that child of ours, the project, the work of art, we pay for it with our own money because it's very natural that every father and mother will pay for their own child.
It's absolutely, buoyant.
It just goes beyond the mundane.
We're still trying to take it in and figure out what it's supposed to mean.
The wind is blowing in it, just right, so it's an experience.
The temporary character is the aesthetical decision to translate that fragility, vulnerability we have to our lives and to ourselves.
Look, there's not a speck of wind.
And there wind.
There are two sentences we enjoy, once in a lifetime, and also we love to say, once upon a time.
Morning papers after the break. A lot of good morning papers today, so let's move quickly through them. Philadelphia Inquirer leads with the Lebanon assassination. Here's a story that caught my eye. Painkillers, ill health. Hearings start tomorrow on Vioxx and Celebrex and Vextra and all the controversy thereof. That's a good front page story by my thinking. Dallas Morning News, testing in Texas positively weak. In many districts, users can avoid detection. Dallas Morning News following up on its series on steroids and high school students. The Detroit Free Press. I don't get this, okay? Bags overwhelm Metro handlers. NWA, that would be Northwest Airlines, blames crush of travelers over the weekend. They sell the tickets to the passengers. They know how many people are on the planes. Come on, how can you blame the travelers? Putting out a... Just my thinking here. Putting out a costly habit ignited debate. The Lansing area chief executive who instituted a controversial smoking ban. You cannot smoke, you can't smoke at all. I mean, not at work, not at home, period, or he'll fire you. Anyway, it's a very good story and raises lots of kind of cool issues. Thank you. The Detroit News. Will NHL pull plug on Wednesday? Here's a better question. How many people will care if the NHL pulls the plug on Wednesday? National Hockey League's blocked out its players. It's actually quite sad because it's a great and wonderful sport, and both sides have managed to ruin it. The Christian Science Monitor, actually, maybe both sides haven't. The war of words over Social Security. Choices like personal account or risk can be crucial as both try to lock in support. I've said this before, I'll say it again. It's the best issue out there these days. Cincinnati Enquirer, if you're in Ohio and you're looking for work, they got a lead story for you. Jobs in healthcare field are hottest in Ohio. Need work, 194,000, 68 openings each year. Newspaper counted them all. Chicago Sun-Times. NHL about to cancel season. What? Does anybody care? Wait, I just said that. The weather tomorrow in Chicago. Relapse. We'll wrap it up in a moment.
Morning Papers is sponsored by Ambien. Get back into the rhythm of life. Talk to your doctor about Ambien. Log on to cnn.com/newsnight to read more about tomorrow's headliners.
Post captioning hours on CNN, sponsored in part by Eggland's Best Eggs. Better taste, better nutrition.
Want to know my secret to get my family to eat healthy?
Grandma!
My secret's Eggland's Best Eggs.
They taste great.
And they're also good for you.
Try Eggland's Best.
Good to have you with us tonight. Soledad and Bill in American Morning, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Lou Dobbs tonight next. For most of you, we're all back here tomorrow, 10 o'clock Eastern. Until then, good night for all of us at Newsnight.